All political economists of any standing admit that the introduction of new machinery has a baneful effect on the workmen in the old handicrafts and manufactures with which this machinery at first competes. Almost all of them bemoan the slavery of the factory operative. And what is the great trump card that they play? That machinery, after the horrors of the period of introduction and development have subsided, instead of diminishing, in the long run increases the number of the slaves of labor. Yes, political economy revels in the hideous theory, hideous to every philanthropist who believes in the eternal nature-ordained necessity for capitalist production, that after a period of growth and transition, even its crowning success, the factory system based on machinery grinds down more workpeople than on its first introduction it throws on the streets. It is true that in some cases, as we saw from instances of English worsted and silk factories, an extraordinary extension of the factory system may, at a certain stage of its development, be accompanied not only by a relative, but by an absolute decrease in the number of operatives employed. In the year when a special census of all the factories in the United Kingdom was taken by order of Parliament, the factories in those parts of Lancashire, Cheshire, and Yorkshire, included in the district of Mr. Baker, the factory inspector, numbered of these contained power looms, spindles, employed horsepower, and person. In the year the same factories contained looms, spindles, had a steam power of horses and a water power of horses and employed person. Between and therefore, the increase in looms was percent, in spindles percent, and in engine power percent, while the number of persons employed decreased a percent. Between and considerable extension of the English woolen manufacture took place, while the number of hands employed in it remained almost stationary, showing how greatly the introduction of new machines had superseded the labor of preceding period. In certain cases, the increase in the number of hands employed is only apparent. That is, it is not due to the extension of the factories already established, but to the gradual annexation of connected trades. For instance, the increase in power looms and in the hands employed by them between and was in the cotton trade simply owing to the extension of this branch of industry, but in the other trades to the application of steam power to the carpet loom, to the ribbon loom, and to the linen loom, which previously had been worked by the power of men. Hence the increase of the hands in these latter trades was merely a symptom of a diminution in the total number employed. Finally, we have considered this question entirely apart from the fact that everywhere, except in the metal industries, young persons and women and children form the preponderating element in the class of factory hand. In the few remarks I have still to make on this point, I shall refer to some actually existing relations, the existence of which our theoretical investigation has not yet disclosed. So long as, in a given branch of industry, the factory system extends itself at the expense of the old handicrafts or of manufacture, the result is as sure as is the result of an encounter between an army furnished with breech loaders and one armed with bows and arrows. This first period, during which machinery conquers its field of action, is of decisive importance owing to the extraordinary profits that it helps to produce. These profits not only form a source of accelerated accumulation, but also attract into the favored sphere of production a large part of the additional social capital that is being constantly created and is ever on the lookout for new investments. The special advantages of this first period of fast and furious activity are felt in every branch of production that machinery invades. So soon, however, as the factory system has gained a certain breadth of footing and a definite degree of maturity, and especially so soon as its technical basis, machinery, is itself produced by machinery, so soon as coal mining and iron mining, the metal industries and the means of transport have been revolutionized, so soon, in short, as the general conditions requisite for production by the modern industrial system have been established, this mode of production acquires an elasticity, capacity for sudden extension by leaps and bounds that finds no hindrance except in the supply of raw material and in the disposal of the produce. On the one hand, the immediate effect of machinery is to increase the supply of raw material in the same way, for example, as the cotton gin augmented the production of cotton. On the other hand, the cheapness of the articles produced by machinery and the improved means of transport and communication furnish the weapons for conquering foreign markets. By ruining handicraft production in other countries, machinery forcibly converts them into fields for the supply of its raw material. In this way, East India was compelled to produce cotton, wool, hemp, jute, and indigo for Great Britain. By constantly making a part of the hands supernumerary, modern industry, in all countries where it has taken root, gives a spur to emigration and to the colonization of foreign lands, which are thereby converted into settlements for growing the raw material of the mother country, just as Australia, for example, was converted into a colony for growing wool. A new and international division of labor, a division suited to the requirements of the chief centers of modern industry, springs up and converts one part of the globe into a chiefly agricultural field of production, for supplying the other part which remains a chiefly industrial field. This revolution hangs together with radical changes in agriculture, which we need not here further inquire into. On the motion of Mr. Gladstone, the House of Commons ordered on the 8th February a return of the total quantities of grain, corn, and flour of all sorts imported into and exported from the United Kingdom between the years end. I give below a summary of the result. The flour is given in quarters of corn. The enormous power inherent in the factory system of expanding by jumps and the dependence of that system on the markets of the world necessarily beget feverish production, followed by overfilling of the markets, whereupon contraction of the markets brings on crippling of production. The life of modern industry becomes a series of periods of moderate activity, prosperity, overproduction, crisis, and stagnation. The uncertainty and instability to which machinery subjects the employment, and consequently the conditions of existence, of the operatives become normal, owing to these periodic changes of the industrial cycle. Except in the periods of prosperity, there rages between the capitalists the most furious combat for the share of each in the markets. This share is directly proportional to the cheapness of the product. Besides the rivalry that this struggle begets in the application of improved machinery for replacing labor power, and of new methods of production, there also comes a time in every industrial cycle when a forcible reduction of wages beneath the value of labor power is attempted for the purpose of cheapening commodity. A necessary condition, therefore, to the growth of the number of factory hands is a proportionally much more rapid growth of the amount of capital invested in mills. This growth, however, is conditioned by the ebb and flow of the industrial cycle. It is, besides, constantly interrupted by the technical progress that at one time virtually supplies the place of new workmen, at another, actually displaces old ones. This qualitative change in mechanical industry continually discharges hands from the factory, or shuts its doors against the fresh stream of recruits, while the purely quantitative extension of the factories absorbs not only the men thrown out of work, but also fresh contingent. The workpeople are thus continually both repelled and attracted, hustled from pillar to post, while at the same time constant changes take place in the sex, age, and skill of the levy. The lot of the factory operatives will be best depicted by taking a rapid survey of the course of the English cotton industry. From to this trade was depressed or stagnant for years only. During this period of years, the English manufacturers had a monopoly of machinery and of the markets of the world. To depression and prosperity, abolition of the laws against trades unions, great extension of factories everywhere, crisis, great misery and riots among the factory operatives, slight improvement, great increase in power looms and in exports especially to India, surpass all former years, glutted markets, great distress, to continued depression, the monopoly of the trade with India and China withdrawn from the East India Company, great increase of factories and machinery. Shortness of hands. The new poor law furthers the migration of agricultural laborers into the factory districts. The country districts swept of children. White slave trade, great prosperity, contemporaneous starvation of the handloom weavers, great prosperity and depression and crisis, revival, great depression, riots, calling out of the military and frightful suffering among the factory operatives. The manufacturers locked the hands out of the factories in order to enforce the repeal of the Corn Law. The operatives stream in thousands into the towns of Lancashire and Yorkshire, are driven back by the military, and their leaders brought to trial at Lancaster. Great misery, revival, great prosperity, continued improvement at first, then reaction. Repeal of the Corn Laws, crisis, general reduction of wages by and more %. In honor of the big loaf, continued depression, Manchester under military protection, revival, prosperity, falling prices, low wages, frequent strikes, improvement begins, strikes continue. The manufacturers threaten to import foreign hands, increasing exports. Strike for months and great misery at Preston, prosperity, glutted markets. News of failures stream in from the United States, Canada, and the Eastern markets. Great prosperity, crisis, improvement, great prosperity, increase in factories, zenith of the English cotton trade. The Indian, Australian, and other markets so glutted with goods that even in they had not absorbed the whole lot. The French Treaty of Commerce. Enormous growth of factories and machinery. Prosperity continues for a time. Reaction, the American Civil War, cotton famine to complete collapse. The history of the cotton famine is too characteristic to dispense with dwelling upon it for a moment. From the indications as to the condition of the markets of the world in and, we see that the cotton famine came in the nick of time for the manufacturers, and was to some extent advantageous to them, a fact that was acknowledged in the reports of the Manchester Chamber of Commerce, proclaimed in Parliament by Palmerston and Derby, and confirmed by events. No doubt among the cotton mills in the United Kingdom there were many of small size. According to the report of Mr. A. Redgrave, out of the mills included in his district, or percent employed less than 10 horsepower each, or percent employed HP and less than HP, while employed upwards of HP, the majority of the small mills were weaving sheds, built during the period of prosperity after, for the most part by speculators, of whom one supplied the yarn, another the machinery, a third the buildings, and were worked by men who had been overlooked, or by other persons of small means. These small manufacturers mostly went to the wall. The same fate would have overtaken them in the commercial crisis that was staved off only by the cotton famine. Although they formed 1/3 of the total number of manufacturers, yet their mills absorbed a much smaller part of the capital invested in the cotton trade. As to the extent of the stoppage, it appears from authentic estimates that in October percent of the spindles and percent of the looms were standing. This refers to the cotton trade as a whole, and of course requires considerable modification for individual districts. Only very few mills worked full-time, the remainder worked at intervals. Even in those few cases where full-time was worked, and at the customary rate of piece wage, the weekly wages of the operatives necessarily shrank, owing to good cotton being replaced by bad, Sea Island by Egyptian, American and Egyptian by Surat, and pure cotton by mixings of waste and Surat. The shorter fiber of the Surat cotton and its dirty condition, the greater fragility of the thread, the substitution of all sorts of heavy ingredients for flour and sizing the warps, all these lessened the speed of the machinery, or the number of the looms that could be superintended by one weaver, increased the labor caused by defects in the machinery, and reduced the piece wage by reducing the mass of the product turned off. Where Surat cotton was used, the loss to the operatives when on full time amounted to and more percent. But besides this, the majority of the manufacturers reduced the rate of piece wage by a half and percent. Can therefore conceive the situation of those hands who were employed for only a half or days a week, or for only hours a day. Even after a comparative improvement had set in, the weekly wages of spinners and of weavers were. And, even in this miserable state of things, however, the inventive spirit of the master never stood still, but was exercised in making deductions from wages. These were to some extent inflicted as a penalty for defects in the finished article that were really due to his bad cotton and to his unsuitable machinery. Moreover, where the manufacturer owned the cottages of the workpeople, he paid himself his rents by deducting the amount from these miserable wages. Mr. Redgrave tells us of self-acting minders earning at the end of a fortnight's full work, and that from this sum was deducted the rent of the house, the manufacturer, however, returning half the rent as a gift. The minders took away the sum. In many places, the self-acting minders ranged from 2 per week and the weavers from 2 per week during the latter part of. Even when working short time, the rent was frequently deducted from the wages of the operatives. No wonder that in some parts of Lancashire, a kind of famine fever broke out. But more characteristic than all this was the revolution that took place in the process of production at the expense of the workpeople. Experimenta in corpore like those of anatomists on frogs, were formerly made. Although, says Mr. Redgrave, I have given the actual earnings of the operatives in the several mills, it does not follow that they earn the same amount week by week. The operatives are subject to great fluctuation from the constant experimentalizing of the manufacturers. The earnings of the operatives rise and fall with the quality of the cotton mixings. Sometimes they have been within percent of former earnings, and then in a week or two they have fallen off from 2%. These experiments were not made solely at the expense of the workman's means of subsistence. His 5 senses also had to pay the penalty. The people who are employed in making up Surat cotton complain very much. They inform me, on opening the bales of cotton there is an intolerable smell which causes sickness. In the mixing, scribbling, and carding rooms, the dust and dirt which are disengaged irritate the air passages and give rise to cough and difficulty of breathing. A disease of the skin, no doubt from the irritation of the dirt contained in the Surat cotton, also prevails. The fiber being so short, a great amount of size, both animal and vegetable, is used. Bronchitis is more prevalent owing to the dust. Inflammatory sore throat is common, from the same cause. Sickness and dyspepsia are produced by the frequent breaking of the weft, when the weaver sucks the weft through the eye of the shuttle. On the other hand, the substitutes for flour were a fortunatus purse to the manufacturers, by increasing the weight of the yarn. They caused pounds of raw material to weigh pounds after it was woven. In the report of inspectors of factories for April, we read as follows: "The trade is availing itself of this resource at present to an extent which is even discreditable. I have heard on good authority of a cloth weighing pounds, which was made of divided by pounds, cotton and divided by pounds, size, and of another cloth weighing divided by pounds, of which pounds was size. These were ordinary export shirtings. In cloths of other descriptions, as much as per cent. Size is sometimes added, so that a manufacturer may, and does truly boast, that he is getting rich by selling cloth for less money per pound than he paid for the mere yarn of which they are composed. But the workpeople had to suffer, not only from the experiments of the manufacturers inside the mills, and of the municipalities outside, not only from reduced wages and absence of work, from want and from charity, and from the eulogistic speeches of lords and commons. Unfortunate females who, in consequence of the cotton famine, were at its commencement thrown out of employment, and have thereby become outcasts of society, and now, though trade has revived and work is plentiful, continue members of that unfortunate class, and are likely to continue so. There are also in the borough more youthful prostitutes than I have known for the last years.